"Don't open that envelope, Senator." She said it quietly. Not a whisper exactly, but close enough that only two people in that room heard it, the man holding the envelope and the woman who'd just handed him a glass of water and had no business saying anything at all. Senator Harold Vance froze. Not because the words scared him, because the voice that said them was completely calm. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was the kind of event where the tablecloths cost more than most people's car payments. Held every year at the Aldrich Pavilion in downtown Chicago, it raised money for children's literacy programs and gave the city's wealthiest residents a reason to dress up and feel good about themselves for a few hours. The waitstaff wore black. The guests wore everything else. Celeste Odom had been working the gala circuit for 11 years. Not as a caterer, she ran Odom Event Services, a mid-sized staffing company she'd built from a folding table in her living room after her divorce. These days, she kept her name off the website and her face mostly out of the spotlight. She showed up at events because she liked to, not because she had to. She liked watching how people moved in rooms like this, who refilled their own glass before looking around, who thanked the waitstaff by name, who pretended not to see them at all. Tonight she was working a corner station near the main stage because Janelle, her best floor manager, had called out sick at 4 in the afternoon, and Celeste had learned long ago that when something went wrong, she handled it herself instead of hoping someone else would. She was 53 years old, 5'6", and wearing the same black uniform as everyone else on her crew. Her hair was pulled back. Her shoes were comfortable. She had a master's degree in hospitality management and a minority business enterprise certification she'd fought for over 2 years. None of that was visible. That was usually fine with her. Senator Vance arrived at her station at 9:17. She recognized him immediately. He'd been on the cover of Chicago Magazine 3 months ago, the piece about his infrastructure bill. Tall man, early 60s, the kind of silver-haired that photographed well. He was with his chief of staff, a younger man named Bryson Alcott, who moved slightly ahead of him wherever they went, clearing invisible obstacles. "Club soda," Vance said, not to Celeste specifically. Just into the air in front of him. She poured it, set it on the small cocktail napkin. He picked it up without looking at her. That was fine. She wasn't there to be seen. What she was there for, what she noticed, because she always noticed, was the envelope. It was sitting on the edge of the high-top table next to Vance's elbow, cream-colored, sealed, with no name or address on the front. Someone had set it there in the last 6 minutes, because Celeste had restocked that exact table at 9:11, and it hadn't been there then. She'd been watching the room ever since. She hadn't seen who left it. That alone wasn't unusual. People left things at tables at events like this: business cards, invitations, handwritten notes to donors. It happened constantly. What was unusual was the man standing near the east corridor, who had been watching that table for the last 4 minutes and had not once looked at anything else in the room. Not the stage, not the guests, not the open bar 20 feet away, just the table. And now that Vance was standing next to it, the man had taken 2 steps back into the shadow of the corridor entrance and pulled out his phone. Celeste had been watching people at events for 11 years. She knew what genuine distraction looked like, and she knew what deliberate positioning looked like. The man in the corridor was positioned. She didn't know what was in the envelope. She didn't know what was in the envelope. She didn't have a theory. Yet. Theories came after the evidence, not before, and all she had right now were 2 things that didn't fit. But Vance was reaching for the envelope. "Don't open that envelope, Senator." He froze. Bryson Alcott turned and looked at her as if she had materialized out of the air. "Excuse me?" Celeste kept her eyes on Vance. "I'm sorry to interrupt. That envelope was placed on this table sometime in the last 6 minutes. I don't know who put it there, but there's a man in the east corridor who's been watching this exact table since before you arrived. He stepped back when you walked up." A beat of silence. "That's," Alcott started. "Bryson." Vance's voice was even. He hadn't moved his hand away from the envelope yet, but he was looking at Celeste now. Really looking. "You said 6 minutes. I restocked this station at 9:11. It wasn't here then. It's 9:17 now. And the man in the corridor, he's still there. East entrance, gray jacket, phone out." He hasn't looked at anything except this table. Vance set down his club soda. He did not pick up the envelope. He turned to Alcott. Get Damaris. Damaris turned out to be his security lead, a compact woman with close-cut hair and an earpiece. She listened to Celeste's account without interrupting. Then she looked at Vance. I want to clear the immediate area. Do it. She looked at Celeste. Can you show me which man? Celeste walked her to a sight line. The man in the gray jacket was still there. He'd noticed the activity near the table and had straightened slightly, no longer pretending to look at his phone. Damaris spoke quietly into her earpiece. 2 other members of the security team materialized near the corridor entrance. The man in the gray jacket looked at them, looked at the table, and walked quickly toward the far exit. He didn't make it. Celeste didn't find out what was in the envelope that night. She went back to work. She restocked the station. She managed her floor crew through the rest of the gala, made sure the teardown happened on schedule, and drove home to her apartment in Lincoln Park at 12:40 in the morning. She made tea. She sat by the window for a while. Then she went to sleep. That was the part nobody ever understood when she told the story later. That she went to sleep. People expected her to say she'd been too wired, too curious, too aware that something significant had happened. And she was aware. But she'd learned over the years that the middle of the night was not the time to try to make sense of things. The middle of the night was for sleep. Clarity came in the morning. What came the next morning was Bryson Alcott's number on her phone at 7:43 a.m. She let it ring through. He left a voicemail. His voice was careful, neutral, deliberately unrevealing in the way that people practiced when they weren't sure how much to say. He said Senator Vance would like to speak with her at her earliest convenience, and that if she was available, could she call this number back? She called back at 8:15 after her coffee. Vance picked up himself. No assistant, no transfer, just his voice, the same measured quality she'd noticed the night before. Ms. Odom, he said, I owe you a conversation. They met 2 days later at a coffee shop in the West Loop. His choice, she noticed, not his office, and not anywhere that required signing in or showing ID. He was already there when she arrived, sitting in the back corner with a regular coffee and no entourage. Damaris was somewhere nearby, Celeste assumed, but not visible. She sat down. The man in the gray jacket, Vance said. His name is Gordon Pruitt. He worked in my Chicago office for 4 years. He left 18 months ago, officially to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, he left because I wouldn't support a zoning variance that would have significantly benefited a real estate group he had financial ties to. Celeste wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. The envelope contained photographs. And a letter. He paused. The photographs were fabricated. The letter was designed to look like a resignation statement, something that would have gone public immediately if I'd opened it in that room, in front of those people, on that stage. He looked at her steadily. It would have ended my career and my ability to finish what I came to finish. She didn't ask what that was. Not yet. How did he know you'd pick it up? The corner of Vance's mouth moved. Because I always read correspondence at events. It's a known habit. My staff knows it. My donors know it. Apparently my enemies know it too. He picked up his coffee. You didn't know that, Descartes. No. So you weren't watching for that specifically. I was watching for anything that didn't fit, she said. The envelope didn't fit. The man watching it didn't fit. He set the cup down. Ms. Odom, can I ask what you were doing there? I looked up Odom Event Services. You don't typically work the floor yourself. One of my managers called out sick, so it was coincidence. It was a staffing gap, she considered. I don't really believe in coincidence. I believe in paying attention. He was quiet for a moment. Then, neither do I. What Celeste didn't tell him that morning, what she hadn't told anyone yet, was that she recognized Gordon Pruitt, not from the gala, not from any event she'd staffed. She recognized him from 7 years ago, from a city council subcommittee hearing she'd attended with her business attorney the year she was fighting for her MBE certification. Pruitt had been a city liaison then, not yet in Vance's office, and he'd been in the room when the subcommittee chair, a man named Aldous Bingham, who'd since retired, had twice interrupted Celeste's testimony to question whether her company's revenue numbers were independently verified. She hadn't mentioned Pruitt's name in her account to Damaris. She hadn't been sure the connection was relevant. She still wasn't sure, but she'd been thinking about it for 2 days, turning it over, trying to decide if it changed anything. She decided to mention it now. When she finished, Vance sat very still for a moment. "Bingham," he said. "He's been retired for 4 years. He has." Vance looked at her. "He's also on the board of a foundation that recently donated $3 million to a PAC that's been running opposition research on my infrastructure bill." Celeste set down her coffee. "You couldn't have known that," he said. "No, but now you do. Now I do." He leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, a delivery truck was double parked and someone was honking. The ordinary sounds of a city going about its morning. Vance looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at complex legislation, not trying to simplify it, just trying to understand the full shape of it. "What do you want, Ms. Odom?" he said. "Not as a transaction. I'm not asking what you want in exchange for what you did. I'm asking what you actually want. In your work, your company, whatever you're trying to build." It was not the question she'd expected. She thought about her answer the way she thought about everything. Not quickly and not carelessly. "I want the MBE certification process to be transparent. I want subcontractor access to city contracts to not depend on who you know in the licensing office. I want the people who build the scaffolding and run the kitchens and set up the chairs to have a real path to something bigger." She paused. "I've been trying to do that for 11 years through the right channels. It's slow. Sometimes I wonder if the channels are designed to be slow." Vance nodded once, slowly. "They are," he said. "Some of them. I've been trying to fix that for 6 years." He looked at her. "I could use someone who pays attention." She looked back at him. "I'm not a political person, Senator. I'm not asking you to be." He picked up his coffee. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to sit on an advisory committee. Small business access to city and state contracts, minority enterprise specifically. Your name would be public. Your participation would be real, and I won't pretend it isn't harder than it sounds, but I think you'd make it better." She was quiet. "Think about it," he said. "I will." She paused. "What's going to happen to Pruitt? That's being handled. And Bingham?" "That," he said carefully, "is going to take longer, but it's going to happen." She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why. She had no particular reason to trust politicians, and she'd spent 11 years learning that institutions moved slowly and usually in favor of whoever was already inside them. But there was something in the way he'd sat down alone in a coffee shop and answered her questions directly that she recognized. It was the same thing she tried to do in her own business, show up where things were actually happening, not where things looked like they were happening. She finished her coffee. He finished his. "I'll let you know by Friday," she said. "That's fine." She picked up her bag. "One more thing." He waited. "The man who honks outside my certification hearings when I'm trying to testify. The one who calls my revenue numbers into question when they've been independently verified twice. The one who takes a 15-minute coffee break right when I'm scheduled to speak." She kept her voice level. "When this committee meets, I want someone in the room who's watching the room, not just listening to what's being said." Vance looked at her for a long moment. "That's the job," he said. She nodded, stood up, walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard him say quietly, not quite loud enough for the room, but loud enough, "Thank you, Miss Odom." She didn't turn around, but she slowed down just slightly before she pushed through the door into the morning. Gordon Pruitt was arrested 3 weeks later on charges of criminal harassment and attempted defamation. The case was quiet. No press release, no dramatic courtroom footage, just a brief item in the Tribune's court records section that most people scrolled past. Celeste noticed it on a Tuesday morning, between answering emails and reviewing a contract proposal. She read it once, set her phone down, drank her coffee. Aldous Bingham's name came up 6 months after that, in a federal investigation into PAC financing irregularities that had nothing to do with Celeste and nothing to do with Vance directly, but had everything to do with a pattern of money that someone, somewhere had finally started to follow. Celeste learned about it from the news, same as everyone else. She was sitting in a conference room at City Hall when she saw the notification. She was there because the advisory committee had been meeting for 4 months by then, and today they were reviewing proposed changes to the subcontractor licensing process. Changes that would, if passed, cut the application timeline in half and eliminate 2 redundant steps that had served for years, primarily as opportunities for delays and quiet discouragements. Across the table, a man from the licensing office was explaining why the changes might create administrative complications. He used the word streamline as if it were a threat. Celeste wrote 2 words on her notepad, turned it so the committee chair could see it. He's stalling. The chair, a woman named Portia Ashby, who ran a workforce development nonprofit and had the kind of patience that came from 20 years of doing hard things in rooms full of people who hadn't wanted her there, glanced at the notepad, then at Celeste. A small nod. Portia Ashby said, "Let's pause on the administrative question and talk about the timeline data. Miss Odom, can you walk us through the numbers?" Celeste could. She'd prepared for this. She always prepared. She stood up. She talked for 8 minutes. When she was done, the room was quiet in a different way than it had been before. A listening quiet, not a waiting one. The man from the licensing office had stopped clicking his pen. The changes passed in committee that afternoon. Outside on the steps of City Hall, waiting for her Uber, Celeste called her operations director and went over 3 staffing questions that had come up while she'd been in the meeting. Then she called her daughter in Atlanta, who was 27 and running her own small graphic design business, and called every Sunday, but sometimes also on Tuesdays when she had news. She had news. A new client. A good one. Celeste listened. She asked the right questions. She laughed at the right moment. She hung up and stood on the steps of City Hall in the October afternoon, the wind coming off the lake with its particular Chicago sharpness that never quite let you get comfortable. And she thought about the woman who had shown up at the Aldrich Pavilion in black clothes, with comfortable shoes, and seen something that didn't fit. She thought about how little it had taken. Not heroism, not a grand decision, just attention, and the willingness to say what she saw. That was the thing most people talked themselves out of, she'd noticed. Not the seeing, the saying. The Uber arrived. She got in. The city kept moving.